So you probably looked at the agenda. We might want to switch up one thing. We're going to do the public comments, and then if Todd's here, we'll get kind of the city org update. And we think that probably the budget discussion may be quite relevant to those areas. So maybe thinking of moving that up. Does that sound reasonable before? Okay, good, excellent. If we have the right reps present.
Yeah, I know Bob's coming at 10:15 for the budget piece, so we might need to wait till then for that part.
So whenever we can do it, whenever it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's start with public comments.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Bob Solinger, and I'm representing Willamette Riverkeeper this morning. Just as a quick bit of background, I did 2 tours of duty on the Parks Board. I think I served on 12 different Parks budget committees, numerous natural resource committees for parks, and I also served on the BES Portland Utility Board. So I come to you today as somebody who's a long-term supporter of parks and trees, and I consider myself a friend of parks. But I come to you today with some real concerns. I don't know how closely this committee was tracking what happened at City Council with the reorganization a couple of weeks ago, but what did occur was that Parks and Commissioner Ryan successfully advanced an amendment that was introduced the evening before the hearing to remove tree programs and natural area programs from the Bureau of Environmental Services and transfer them to parks. Parks and Commissioner Ryan also effectively blocked the creation of a new Natural Resources Bureau that was overwhelmingly supported by the community. The community overwhelmingly supported the Natural Resources Bureau and opposed the transfer. And the oral testimony, except for the invited testimony of Commissioner Ryan, was 100% that direction. The written testimony, I believe, was 90-something to 3 in that direction. So Parks went clearly against the community, long-term stakeholders, long-term partners on an amendment that was introduced the evening before. The real important thing though here is the substance of what occurred. And as somebody that's worked on parks issues for 3 decades and served on a lot of budget committees, I am deeply, deeply concerned with this move. The reason I'm concerned is that there was no consideration given of the ability to finance this over time, about the legal implications, about the regulatory implications. It was not even a half-baked proposal, in my opinion. And that's why it was so strongly opposed by the community. It was also opposed by former Parks Director Zeri Santner, who came out of retirement to testify against her former agency. I think we're at real risk here. I don't think we should have done this without a real plan. I'm here to say that I'm here to work with you, but I also want to get my concerns on record, both with you and the Parks Board. I think the financing is a real issue. I know right now there's a lot of money coming in through the Portland Clean Energy Fund, but I don't think that's assured. I think also Parks may be counting on BES funds transferring with those assets. That's not assured either. For those of you that track the Anderson lawsuit in 2016, the only issue that BES lost on in terms of illegal transfers of funds was the money they were giving to Parks for natural resources. So that's not assured in any way, shape, or form. I don't think this PSEF funding is secure, and we know that the levy runs out. We also know that from all of your reports, and I read through them all in the last week, over and over and over again, it talks about how there is not enough money to fund natural areas and trees. That we have over 1,000 distressed assets at parks, and if things continue the way they are in terms of the general fund, 1 in 5 assets will have to be liquidated in the next several years. That is a very hostile environment in which to make that kind of a move. To finish up, we're looking for a couple of things as a stakeholder. This is our request to you. Number 1, we believe that it's absolutely essential if Parks is going to take on new natural resource assets, that they hold the funding for those things harmless going forward. I know that's a big ask, but don't ask for things you can't pay for. So going forward, we think the level of funding needs to stay status or higher. Number 2, Parks has always shied away from regulatory roles. I've experienced that over and over again. But BES uses its natural resource assets to meet regulatory compliance issues. So we think it's really important now that Parks take that on wholeheartedly. We want to plan for how you are going to use those assets to meet regulatory obligations. And number 3, we believe, and this is a little bit outside your purview, but it's really important. Parks has a lot of natural areas already. A lot of them are in poor condition. A very significant portion of them are in poor condition. To some degree, I think Parks has gotten a pass on that for years and years because you didn't have enough money. Those days are over from my perspective. There needs to be a plan in place to get every single natural area in their portfolio up to good or excellent condition. Again, Parks has no business taking on new assets if it is not prepared to take care of the ones it owns. So again, I come to you as a friend today. I come to you as somebody that's put 30 years into helping build these programs, who sat on committees like you do, and I appreciate the work you do. But I think what happened a couple of weeks ago was one of the most ill-informed decisions I've ever seen over 30 years of doing this work. And I think we have a lot of work together, and I say that as we together, you're partners, and you make this happen in a way that is successful. I think it's a very, very big lift. It has to happen fast. I've heard that the answer is we'll figure out in the budget cycle. You've all been through budget cycles. You know what those look like. That's not how you figure out long-term sustainability. If Parks had done that, was able to do it through the budget cycle, you wouldn't be having all the problems you have right now. So we need a plan. So again, appreciate the time. No, I probably talked a little bit long, but I think it's really important for those of you that aren't tracking it and those of you that are, that you understand where some of your longest term stakeholders are coming from on this. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Any questions or comments from
I have one.
commissioners?
As
Yeah.
for shying away from regulatory role, a large part of my job as city forester is regulatory, and even last month, the Forestry Commission had a presentation from our permitting and regulation manager. We are the regulators of trees in the city and have been for some time, and people may disagree have different opinions about where that should reside, but it's urban forestry. So that's not accurate when it comes to the tree aspects. Title 11.
I understand that Parks is, I helped develop Title 11, as Roberta recalls, I was on that committee. What I'm talking about is we have found Parks very reticent overall to actually do enforcement. It's an agency that has typically wanted to be a friend of the community and has shied away from some of the hard regulatory decisions. But I'm not just talking about Title 11. I'm talking about stormwater compliance. I'm talking about the Clean Water Act. I'm talking about floodplain mitigation. I'm talking about wildlife ESA issue compliance. The national assets of the city play a direct role in meeting all of those federal mandates. And on the BES side, that is really, really large. And all of the assets they have are geared toward that end of the spectrum. And so it is a much more complex universe, I think, that Parks is stepping into by taking the BES assets. And so, yes, you do some, and I think you do some very well, but this is a much, much bigger arena.
Thanks, Bob.
Roberta?
Just a couple of things. I guess I share some of Mr. Salinger's concerns about both process and the substance of the change in transition, but I'm going to save my questions for the next agenda item, which where the director or deputy director will deal with those. I hope that part of what will be discussed is in that item is some of the questions that Mr. Salinger's raised, particularly relating to transition and financing and integration, I guess, of the new programmatic responsibilities Parks has with their current and previous regulatory pieces, and kind of how that transition process is going to work as relates to programmatic stuff and the budget. Thanks.
Ken?
Adrian, I think you said my name, but I couldn't tell, so I'm just gonna go. So Bob, my question for you is, as normally it is for folks, is as within the commission role, what would you specifically recommend that the commission, what would you recommend that we do to move forward with what, like the 3 points, like whether that's the policy committee playing a role, what we maybe need to be engaged with, like what would be your specific recommendations for us as this body?
No, thanks for the question. It's a great question. A couple of things. Number one, I think really developing a sustainable funding plan. I don't like it that we're counting on PSEF and the levy and those kinds of things. And first getting a baseline. What is the current level of funding at BES and at Parks for all the tree components? So that can be a baseline going forward, so the public can know where we're at and whether we're going up or down over time. incorporating those new assets. Number two, making a commitment, at least to the degree that a committee can, to make sure that that goes up, not down, that it's now held harmless. And being involved in the budget cycle to that effect, reminding folks, because you have that leverage, that when the budget cycle comes and we have proposals to cut, and sooner or later we will, that the pushback is no, we can't, and here's why. Number three, really doing an assessment of the regulatory role that BES took on and how those assets play into that, and developing, I don't want to say a plan, but some sort of document that articulates that and acknowledges this as how you're going to work to accomplish that. And the last thing is, I do hope that you will support a Natural Resources Bureau amendment when it does come forward. I think it still will. I don't think that necessarily means that assets get pulled out of parks. The amendment that was opposed basically said, we're going to put it on the org chart and we're going to figure out what it means. It didn't necessarily move anything at all. But the reason I think we need a Natural Resources Bureau in the city of Portland is we have a lot more programs than just parks and natural areas. We have Superfund and brownfields and floodplains and Superfund and so on. And there needs to be a place where I think a lot of this is better consolidated, better organized, better thought out. And it may be managed by different bureaus, but I think we need a brain trust in the city of Portland that actually is elevated to a bureau scale to deal with natural resources. So I hope you can support that going forward as well. So those are something. I can give you a longer list, but I won't right now.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we're out of time, but I think, if you'd like to stay for the next couple of items, because I think it's relevant to the discussion. So we have Director Todd, Deputy Director Todd Longren, who's here to talk to us about the city organizational update.
Restrooms?
Good morning, Deputy Director Lofgren, welcome.
Good morning. Nice to see everybody. Sorry, I should have come downstairs, but I see you at home as well. So I thought I would just give a brief overview. I think the Urban Forestry Commissioners received an email from Jen Cairo and Director Long, just doing that summary from the November 1st, but I'll just go over that and quickly, and then we'll try to answer your questions if you have more questions. So City Council met on November 1st. They passed a resolution approving the revised organizational chart. And as many of you know, Mike Jordan, our Chief Administrative Officer, has been leading that effort pretty much most of this calendar year. A lot of work happened over the summer. There were some public meetings that happened in September, and then they had a work session the day before. And to Bob's point, things were pretty compressed because of that. So that was the first time the council actually had a work session on the new organizational chart. And then the next day was the hearing, and they had a hearing where they took a vote on the same day. So the city has been proposed is going to be organized by service areas. So this will be a new model to create kind of management structure that will be different, that will be overseen by the Chief Administrative Officer per the new charter that will be operating under. The organizational chart will take effect July 1st, 2024. And so between the council making or taking a vote and supporting the new organizational structure, the budget process will kind of make that a reality. So that's the working concept that council has, but the resolution did not go along with funding. So while there were positions and organizational units that were put on the organizational chart, that doesn't actually really take effect until July 1st, 2024, because there has to be both FTE and funding to go along to represent what that organizational chart is showing. So what we have now for parks is just kind of go through part of the resolution that relates to parks. So we'll have a city administrator's office with executive leadership. The current organizational chart has 6 deputy city administrators, an equity officer, a sustainability officer, and an assistant city administrator. I will just note on that one, there's been ongoing discussions about how many deputy city administrators they should be, whether 6 is the right number. That's how many service areas we have. But there also has been some discussion about whether one of the deputy city administrators should oversee both the public works and the parks service area. And that park service area is now called Vibrant Communities. So that was renamed in the resolution. And it also moved the City Arts Program into that. It has the Portland Children's Levy as well. And as we're discussing now, an operational unit for natural area and tree management services. The 6 service areas that the city has are budget and finance, city operations, community and economic development, public safety, vibrant communities, which is the new name, which includes parks and what I just mentioned, and public works. There was some more discussion about combining permitting and development services into a single entity in the community and economic development service area. So there's a working group, again, looking at, and that affects urban forestry and how we do permitting. And so that those discussions are ongoing. And again, the timeline for implementation of that is to have it be in effect by July 1st, 2024. So again, using this time through the budget process to develop that. I mentioned there was a chief sustainability officer in that new management structure, and that was added as an amendment during the resolution approval process. And lastly, Mike Jordan made a recommendation in the resolution that BES, BPS, transportation, parks, and water should continue assessing natural resource service delivery and potential process improvements. That's been work that's been going on throughout this whole year. There's been a routine between. I'm getting some feedback from someone. That work's been going on all calendar year between the 5 bureaus. And I think this aligns maybe with what Bob was asking for as well, is to have this team evaluate the opportunities for alignment of service delivery, potential creation of new natural resource organizational unit, including citywide response to climate change. This unit is not referenced in the organizational chart, as the assessment is still in progress, but the transition team continues to be supportive of its development, and transition team here being the team that's led by CAO Mike Jordan. So that was in Mike's resolution documents. That is what the council voted to approve. And so there, I think, is a little bit of a misunderstanding in the public about what was actually in Mike's document and then what were in the 2 amendments. The MAPS Amendment 1 actually was calling this out and putting it, the words natural resources in the public works service area, as Bob mentioned, didn't actually move any, give any direction about moving resources to that, but putting those words in the service area. That was not the recommendation of Mike Jordan. And then the MAPS Amendment 1 didn't have sufficient votes to pass. And again, what did pass was the Ryan Amendment to focus on day-to-day, month-to-month management of natural areas and trees for the city, and to have that aligned with Parks and Recreation. Happy to answer any questions or more clarifications.
My question is, how does the reorganization that was approved by City Council assist in urban forestry getting a better seat at the table in dealing with issues that relate to the Bureau of Transportation and other bureaus where it seems like trees are down. They're a little lower level. By that, I mean they don't jump out at first. They have to fit in with what the other bureaus' code language is. So how does this reorganization, it sets up a separate service area for parks and recreation, which includes urban forestry, separate from the public works, which includes transportation and BES. How does that help urban forestry in better working with these other bureaus?
Sure. I think part of the answer is an organizational chart is just one way to do management of public services. Delegations of authority are really important. As mentioned earlier, funding is really important. And so the unique authorities that are delegated to the urban forester in Title 11 are not being affected by the organizational chart, right? That is being discussed, at least from a permitting perspective, in the permitting working group, which will bring recommendations back for July 1st. And really, it's not much of a change in the moment today of like the authorities that urban forestry has and how it operates today, other than we've said through the resolution that day-to-day, month-to-month management of trees, it's a good idea for the city to functionally align those services. And if you're going to do a functional alignment, Parks and Recreation is actually the leader of having both the staff, the maintenance facilities, and the current authorities to do management of trees in the city of Portland. So manage to your strengths. And I think generally you're going to see that as we move forward with a more one city approach with the city administrator that reports both to the council and to the mayor in the future, that the uniqueness of bureaus over time might be less important because we actually will have one city approach, hopefully, around services that we provide to the public. And I think to the public testimony, hopefully more accountability. Because today we have, pick your service area, a lot of different bureaus providing different forums for conversations about a similar service, having different service standards, and having different ways for the public to be able to influence that. And hopefully we'll get better alignment over time by having more one city approach. So if you care about a certain topic, whether it's natural resources or the homeless issues that we have, the public can go to one place with the city and try to influence how those services are provided, rather than we have many bureaus, many budget advisory committees, many advisory committees that people have to show up in all those different forums when they really just care about one of the services.
Thank you.
It's not a direct answer to your question. It's a work in progress, but it's the best I have today, I think.
So I see we have two commissioners with questions or comments. I just want to say that we're actually at a time, so let's just take maybe 2 minutes to do that. We could probably spend our whole session talking about this area. I know there's a lot of concerns and so on. So yeah, keep it brief, and hopefully maybe we could wrap around back to it in a sense with the City Forest's update budget. So I think we could continue the conversation through those venues. I think Megan, you're first.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. And I'll save the budget part of my question then, which I did have, but I think I'm curious, and Todd's probably familiar with me asking questions like this, but in the way that it's being structured right now, in some ways, I think the thing that flags for me is how we've been working as a commission. And I think honestly, the urban forestry department, to see trees as green infrastructure and have them treated as green infrastructure in this org chart, like Todd, I hear what you're saying about a comprehensive approach. I also know how hard ideals versus reality, you know, with the public. And I think my concern and how I look at this is that we're continuing to posit things a particular way, and the community looks at parks one way and trees different. And that has been a long issue that we've had, trying to get people to understand the value of trees within it. So I think that is just my concern. I think it's one you probably are all well aware of, but I see this and think, oh, once again, we are not talking about trees as the green infrastructure resources are. We're talking about them as just part of a vibrant community, which they are, but they're also public infrastructure. So I think that is clearly a big concern that this structure perpetuates, but I'll leave it there.
And if I could just make a quick comment.
Sure. Yes.
Well, you may have that feeling looking at the organizational chart. That is not how we talk about it at Portland Parks and Recreation. We talk about trees as critical infrastructure to the functioning of a city, and talk about how it's important both for nature and for people's livelihoods. And so you can look at our Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland, our strategic focus, how we communicate the importance of trees. I think more than any time in the history of the last couple of decades that I'm aware of, the increased investment in urban forestry division and the raising of its profile, both in attracting federal and Portland Clean Energy Fund resources, is under like Director Long's leadership and Jen Kyra's leadership. It's been greater than any time that I'm ever aware of. And so, while I appreciate what you're saying about the org chart, I think how we communicate it outside of that org chart and the actual results that we're getting around new investments is in line with, I think, what you're saying.
Roberta? Thank you.
So just one quick thing. I know we need to, but while Todd is still here, for all the reasons you just said, I wasn't aware that there was discussion of having one person or one, you know, kind of organizational development to oversee the vibrant communities and public works. And one of my big concerns is having those report to different people. And I would strongly support. I mean, it's a big portfolio, you know, it's a rather large portfolio, but, you know, for budgeting, for capital improvement financing, for policy conflicts between bureau codes and things like that, it would be really, really helpful to have the infrastructure bureaus, which Parks is, reporting to the same director as or deputy administrator, whatever it's going to be called, that as the other public works bureaus. I think that would be a big both from a functional and a perception perspective for the city, for the public, and for other bureaus. I think that would be great. So I don't know where those discussions are happening and how one might access you know, more information about that. But
yeah,
what's your
maybe
sense?
that's a good segue. I can just talk about kind of next steps of opportunities to give your feedback, either Urban Forestry Commission as a body or, you know, as a group in other city forums or individually, or for those of you that I don't know if Bob's still there, other folks from the public that want to participate in the process. So remember, council just added a new position, this chief sustainability officer that we're reporting to the city administrator. So defining the authorities of that position and how that will oversee, to your point, Roberta, about the policies of individual bureaus related to natural resources and including the urban forest. That is an open question, right? We're in our current state today where the urban forester has those authorities, but I imagine over the coming years here, the delegation of authorities are going to start with the city administrator. All of us are going to have like an executive branch you'd see like at the state or federal government, where everything starts with the city administrator, and then what authorities are below that. And so I know we're just talking about this deputy city administrator role, but actually it starts at the city administrator. And there's a chief sustainability officer. So what's that role? So that's an opportunity, right, to empower decision-making, getting bureaus out of their silos, harmonizing like environmental policy at the city level. That's one opportunity. Another one is, like you said, the deputy city administrator having one over 2 bureaus. But we should all recognize that there's other environmental issues that are happening outside those 2 service areas. So that doesn't, and it doesn't end there either. And so the budget process, we'll have 3 budget advisory committee meetings coming up for parks. These will be topics. Normally our first one's more of a level setting so everyone can get on the same page, but then the next 2 we'll be talking about, and this will be one of the topics we'll be talking about, is how do we operationalize the tree and natural area operational unit within the service area. So that will be an opportunity to learn and also provide public comment. Those are public meetings and we record those too. So if you want to watch them afterwards, we'll put in those on the website. And then we'll be submitting our budget by the end of January. And then the mayor proposes his budget at the beginning of May. And then there's an opportunity for amendments during the month of May, and they'll have public hearings during that. They haven't given us the information yet. Normally there are work sessions in the month of March where these topics are talked about again normally. And so we haven't gotten that schedule from the mayor's office yet and the city budget office. Normally they don't take public testimony at those, but it's a way to have the council have conversation. And so I think those are opportunities that are coming up. And I'm happy to come back to the Urban Forestry Commission or Director Long or Jen, however you want to handle it, to come back and talk about this as we make progress too. Just want to say that the 5 bureaus are going to be having this work through the calendar year. That's on a little different timeline than the budget. So we're really focused on the natural area and tree operational unit, but there are the 5 bureaus having this broader conversation, and they might be more public engagement opportunities through that too. More to come on that.
Great, thanks, that's helpful. We're gonna go ahead and move on. Thanks so much, Todd.
Sure.
So we can't switch to budget, right, because we don't have Bob or.
Yeah, let's do the,
Okay.
we can do the city
So
foresters
let's keep
report.
the agenda then as is. We'll move
Yeah.
to the city foresters report.
Great. I will try to shorten that to get us back on track and finish by 10:15. Was asked to speak a little bit about winter preparedness. I think I'm gonna defer that to the next meeting. It's more of an operational nature than policy, and that'll save us some time. Okay, so first up, urban forest plan update. Give you a status report on that, and Belinda is here today, our project manager for that, coincidentally. Currently, we're recruiting residents for the Community Advisory Committee. We're still looking for more folks from East Portland and also youth or young adults. So if you all can think about who you might know or people that you know might know who could be interested in that Community Advisory Committee, please talk to them, encourage them to apply. Appreciate that. The project team is also wrapping up creation of the community engagement strategy, and that'll be shared with you all on the commission at an upcoming meeting. The team's also preparing for the first technical advisory committee meeting, which will be at the end of this month. And that means over the next 2 months, the team will be meeting with staff in over a dozen different divisions across the city to identify and discuss urban forest management strengths, challenges, and opportunities. Next item, just want to help ensure that you all know that your letter and the Parks Board's letter to the Housing Production Advisory Council that was convened is convened by Governor Kotek. That letter has been submitted to City Council. Thank you for your work on that. We have no further information on HPAC on that council at present. My third item, there was a request from a commissioner to talk more about the construction project on Powell Boulevard. This was covered in a previous meeting, I think pretty robustly. I can reiterate some parts of it that I think are key, if that's helpful for you all. And that is that this is an ODOT project, Oregon Department of Transportation. Powell is a state highway. Therefore, according to City of Portland codes, the city forester does not have authority over the state entity. And it's harder, therefore, for us to influence the outcomes of ODOT's design and their preparation for the project. I'd like you all to know that in spite of that, when these situations, particularly with Oregon Department of Transportation, come up when they're working on their roads, we do everything we can to be engaged with them. We do assign staff to the project, even though we don't have the authority. We try to influence on behalf of tree retention and planting trees when the design is complete. And I'd like to think that because of our engagement in that project, which was extensive and continues, that we saw perhaps more tree retention and more tree planting than we might have. No way to say that officially, I think, but that's always our intention. And influencing Oregon Department of Transportation projects is really something that would happen at the state level if the commission is interested in doing that. My next item is a follow-up from a previous meeting where Parks Sustainable Future Program Manager Sarah Huggins gave an update on the Parks Operations Levy renewal plans. And the commission had a discussion around that, including Sarah. And part of that discussion and a follow-up email from Commissioner Meissner included financing of trees and how the city accounts for trees from a financial perspective. So questions that we have been trying to navigate in parks for a long time, like are trees capitalizable assets, for example? That affects funding sources that can be applied. So I wanted to let you know that that topic is being worked on right now. It has been for a while. After the discussion here at the commission meeting, it's got a refreshed view on it. So staff led by Sarah Huggins, they're compiling a history of what information we've gathered to date, the scenarios that have been put together by parks for sustainable ongoing funding for trees, what we've received as initial yeses and nos for bond eligibility, and where we've had outstanding areas where we'd like to get more information or provide additional information in order to get a different answer from bond counsel. So soon, the work group within parks will be meeting to review all those things and identify gaps, needs, and think about how to do the next steps on that work and be coming back to the commission to share that information and discuss with you. Looks like I will have time, so I'm going to go back. Am I speaking too quickly? Any questions so far? Comments?
Good. Yeah, Jen, I have a question. The report that Sarah's working on, that's very exciting to hear. Do you have a sense of the timing on that? And I think, is the purpose of it in part to support the Sustainable Futures project and potentially discussions like the one around public maintenance of street trees, because that those financing options are going to be, really important to understand and where we need more information and could push the envelope a little bit.
Yes, the date was mid this month, so around now, we hope to hear soon then from Sarah and that team. And this work is part of Sustainable Future, which very specifically has a goal, express goal on websites and in presentations from parks and published documents of finding funds with which to change the city's policy regarding street tree maintenance and move that to a city responsibility instead of adjacent property owners. So that's all part and parcel of the same. And the work that Sarah's leading right now is really getting into the accounting and other details of what types of funding can be used for trees, and where we see obstacles, are there ways for us to overcome those obstacles to what types of funds can be used? So that is important and exciting work, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it hopefully soon, maybe at the next commission meeting, but we need to hear from Sarah and her team first. Is that helpful, Roberta? Commissioner Jortner?
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful.
Okay, great. Then I have just two more things. I will, because there's time, talk about preparation for winter. I'll focus on two aspects of this. First, we do some communication, the Parks and Recreation Public Relations program that really operates for all of parks as the media source, public information source. We go through them. We have asked them to publicize for, in as many ways as possible, the need to care for trees in advance of the stormier season that is fast approaching. And that communication usually entails connecting folks with our local tree care provider list and encouraging property owners to engage an experienced, qualified, certified arborist professional to help them with their tree care in advance of stormy weather when impacts can be greater and an ongoing basis. So they're working on that. They've put some things out on social media. The second of the two aspects for this question are really, what are we doing internally in urban forestry? So as I'm sure you all remember, urban forestry is responsible for the city's 24/7 tree emergency response system and has been for a really long time. And that system applies to all public roads in the city and all city-owned and managed properties in Portland. And we prepare for the season of weather that is winter around here in several ways. First off, we make sure our equipment and supplies are in place and outfitted for the situation, for the weather to come. So things like making sure we have tire chains, backup fuel supply, those sorts of things. People and their personal equipment are prepared. We refresh folks on their safety, especially our arborist crews that do the response 24/7 when we all call for their help. Also go over their duties and communication processes with them, very important in emergency situations, who does what, whom to go to, and what the communication routes are. Also make sure they have weather appropriate gear, things like light, traction devices. Another aspect is we address snow and ice clearing to our 24-hour facility in East Delta Park, where all of our big crews come out of. We have to be able to get in there no matter what, including when the power's out, which it often is. So there's a generator system we have there and everyone gets refreshed on how to operate it. A lot of it's also coordination with the Bureau of Transportation, the roads systems manager in the city, as urban forestry is to the tree system, PBOT is to the road system in Portland. Because they're the street manager, we work pretty much hand in glove with them on tree emergency response. And they also dispatch our emergency responders on the weekends and overnight. We also, in the past 4 or 5 years, established a contract for backup tree emergency services. I remember when I first came into my role long ago, I was surprised to find that the only emergency response we had were our staff. And if those staff were tired or unavailable, we had no backup plan. We do have a backup plan now. We have a contractor. We every fall work with them to make sure our communications and expectations are clear. And we have activated them in the past 2 seasons to help us out. And the last thing I'll mention is just 2 weeks ago, we began making a change in the dispatch of tree emergencies. You may have heard over the past few years about City of Portland 311. It's supposed to be the place you can call for everything. They have a robust team and budget, and we have been working with them with the help of some of the broader park staff to transition tree emergency services dispatch away from our tree technicians who have many other jobs. So away from 823 tree and trees@portlandoregon.gov to 311. And we made that transition 2 weeks ago. Right now we're in the testing and quality assurance phase. It's going really, really well. Please know that no one has to call a different number. Keep calling 823 tree for things tree. The routing system internally will have that dispatch happen from 311 instead of our tree techs, and that's from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. They're not ready to do nights yet. There you go. I have 1 more minute, so I'm going to use it for my last thing. I just wanted to let you know that Casey Jogers, who you saw again last month at the meeting, has recently been named to the National Urban and Community Forestry Advisory Council. That council was established to advise the Secretary of Agriculture and on national urban and community forestry issues and opportunities. That was created by the 1990 Farm Bill. And their function is to develop a comprehensive national urban and community forestry action plan, to evaluate the implementation of that plan, and to annually develop criteria for and submit recommendations for funding to the Forest Service National Urban and Community Cost Shares Program. There are, I think, 12 to 15 council members. Each member has a seat, and they are representative of that voice for the nation. Casey's seat is the city and town governments. So we're really pleased that Casey's in that position, and hope to see good things from the council. That completes my report.
Any quick questions? Comments?
Could you give the long name of that council again? I got 3 words.
Okay. It is the National Urban and Community Forestry Advisory Council. Yeah, and the acronym doesn't sound like anything, Bruce, so that won't help.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are we able to transition to the budget discussion? We're waiting for someone else. Oh, he is there.
Yeah,
Okay,
Bob's here.
welcome. Mr. Gizzi. Okay, so next is Jen and Bob Del Gizzi on the 24-25 budget.
Yeah, and I will. I'll do a little introduction, a refresher for you all, that one of the many roles of the Forestry Commission is to advise on budget affecting trees in the city. And so each year around this time, we bring content information to you for your discussion and for your advice. And that's what Bob and I will be doing today. Bob's going to start us off. I'll introduce Bob Del Gizzi. He's a finance manager with Parks and works closely with all of our divisions, including urban forestry. That said, Bob, would you like to proceed?
Absolutely. Good morning, folks. Got a handful of slides here for you, and the first of these addresses the Bureau's process. Direct Along issued a set of guidance in September for division managers to develop package requests that are aligned with Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland strategic framework. This is so that those packages would support what we've gathered through listening and learning and other activities working with the community. Proposals were developed by the divisions with consultation and support from analysts within my team for budget support, and those were submitted for scoring in the 3rd week of October. And that evaluation was performed using a decision support tool across all of the packages. And that scored the proposals on the basis of criteria for equity and inclusion, for achievement of parks levy commitments, and for performance measurement impacts. In mid-November, Director Long began a multi-week process to evaluate those in the context of the updated financial forecast. The next slide, please. Putting this into the context of the citywide process, this graphic outlines the phases of the annual budget at the city in a normal year. This is not a normal year. That's due to the reorganization of the form of government that will take effect in mid-FY 24-25, which is the year that we're planning. January 1st, it takes effect. Many decisions are not yet made, and there is likely to be some schedule slip from what you see on this screen. The end date is fixed, has to be set up by the first day of July, but there's probably going to be some movement in the December through March timeframe. It's possible. Mayor's guidance is expected to be distributed in phases. Starting in early December, the City Budget Office will convene.
Recording in progress.
Okay, sorry about that, a little echo going on in the background. City Budget Office will provide general fund resource allocation targets and will conduct a budget kickoff for finance staff, members of my team and of all of the other divisions on the 15th of December. And the dates for the approved and the adopted, again, those are constrained. Slippage will occur within the middle in terms of when we would submit the requested budget. The goal on my team is to adhere to the traditional calendar, and then we'll be safe. Go to the next slide, please. I'll give you sort of an overview of the budget as it stands in the current year. This is the adopted budget. This chart represents all funds, and it excludes beginning balances and cash transfers between the funds. The reason those are excluded is because they essentially create kind of a double counting. So this shows the $227 million. The largest is the general fund, and that's followed by the Parks Levy, and then the Capital Improvement Program Fund. A great deal of what is in that is system development charges, which is associated with permits and fees associated with new development in order to expand parks capacity. Capital grants and enterprise funds make up the balance of PP&R's budget, and those are off in the lower right-hand corner here. The majority of funds for the urban forestry program are either a combination of general fund and parks levy, or they are part of what's in the trust fund box, which is where the DPPF and other funding sources are located. Go to the following slide. This is revenue. This is revenue. And again, it's across all funds, and it excludes beginning balance and cash transfers in order to avoid double counting. General fund discretionary resource is the largest source. That's essentially resources that we get from the general fund, which are a combination of property taxes, business license fees, and other resources. That's then followed by charges for services category of revenues. Again, most of that's the system development charges that we talked about in the previous example. The parks levy in this category is shown as taxes because essentially it is a local option property tax, and that all of that goes into the parks levy fund. The interagency category is work that's done for other bureaus. And this would include work that urban forestry does, for example, if it's doing work for Bureau of Transportation or another bureau that shows up in that category. That's where that reimbursement comes from. The intergovernmental category is mostly federal and state grants that we receive. And then licenses and permits. The largest of these is what's called a non-park use permit, where, for example, somebody needs to do some work, and in order to get access to that work, they have to use parks property to do so. We receive a fee for that, for the loss of the service to the public. Finally, there's miscellaneous, which is miscellaneous, variety of items. Among the larger of those is interest earned on fund balances, and we would see that, for example, in the trust funds. We also see that within the parks levy, which also maintains a balance. That basically rounds out the resources. So any questions?
Thanks, Steve. Do you have your thing muted?
Oh. Okay, sorry. All right.
Okay.
Are you gonna go over forestry's budget and revenue that forestry generates? Is that coming?
That's what we're gonna do now.
Great, because that's much more interesting.
Yeah, no, and Bob, thank you. And I'm gonna apologize because I gonna do this last night. I thought we had a slide also about how parks budget is distributed across the divisions in parks. So maybe while I'm doing my bit, if there's any information on that you could put together, we can come back to that. Is that possible?
I'll pull up a quick split.
Thanks. Okay, here we are. To give some context, this is a quick overview of the urban forestry organization and the details of this organization chart, which is not entirely accurate, by the way, it's changing, aren't the point here. It's really just to note the expansion that we have had in the urban forestry division since the Parks Levy implementation began. We have now 91 permanent full-time positions and probably a good 15 to 20 seasonal positions as well. In July 2020, before the levy, we had 45 permanent full-time positions. So it's a really significant increase. And I will say that this has enabled us to fulfill our responsibilities much, much better than in the past, although there are improvements to be made. The increase in staffing is mostly from the Parks Levy, but it also includes increased spending from the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund, and also the recently approved Portland Clean Energy Fund equitable tree canopy positions to develop that new program. So some of the boxes here reflect those. The expansion has allowed us to significantly improve our responsibilities. As I said before, some of the illustrations of that is tree planting. We are now planting around 3,500 trees each year across various property types and various types of programs and types of planting. We also, for the first time in Portland, are caring for our park trees proactively instead of just reacting to requests for folks expressing concern or for emergencies. We've improved our customer service through the trees single point of contact for the city, 823 Tree and trees at portlandoregon.gov. And we also, you'll see in the org chart, kind of center left, have a first time ever code compliance program. And you'll see there's a lot of vacancies there because it's new and interviews are happening now. To frame that up, all regulatory authority needs to have a compliance component. We have not been able to fund that in the past. And now with levy funding, we are able to do that. And that's comparable with the other infrastructure bureaus. For example, BES has a compliance element that we now have as well. Next slide, please. This chart shows how urban forestry is funded, and that's through a variety of sources. The total budget currently is about $19 million for this fiscal year that we're in now. And this amount includes the initial allocation of PSEF funding to begin hiring for key positions to develop and implement the equitable tree canopy program. That hiring is happening right now. General fund and the levy account for the majority of the urban forestry division budget. That's followed by interagency revenue, which Bob mentioned before. This is services to other bureaus, tree related services to other bureaus, and also to PSEF equitable tree canopy. Examples of those services are, for example, street tree issues that we are basically hired by a Bureau of Transportation to do, tree needs near pump stations, and for Bureau of Environmental Services, tree planting for other bureaus where they're required to plant trees, etc. The next highest revenue source is permit fee revenue. That's over on the right. These are regulatory fees. Those fees are intended to recover some of, in some cases more and some cases less, of the cost of delivering the regulatory service to applicants. And then last, the allocations from the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund and the Urban Forestry Fund. These are the two funds established by Title 11 for urban forestry's use to expand canopy and educate about canopy. Next. This table is a high level overview of how urban forestry's program budget is allocated to our service areas. Again, the tree planting budget includes an initial allocation to develop the PSEF funded equitable tree canopy program. So you see, the largest area is tree care operations, maintenance. This includes park tree maintenance, the new program that I mentioned earlier, you know about. Permitting and regulation is the second largest, et cetera. Next slide, please. So going into tree care operations, it's primarily funded by the levy and by general fund. It's the big box on the left. Interagency revenue is largely providing the 24-hour citywide tree emergency response service, which is funded by Bureau of Transportation in their role as the de facto owners of the streets in Portland. But it includes other services we provide, such as as I mentioned, tree maintenance in support of Bureau of Transportation, Bureau of Environmental Service, Portland Water Bureau, maintenance operations. Further examples are pruning street trees to allow clearance for large equipment or for street construction projects, pruning trees away from traffic control signals and signs for safety reasons. And as I mentioned before with the pump station example, maintaining trees on properties owned or managed by other bureaus in the city. And as a reminder, all trees on city property are regulated and require permits from urban forestry to maintain them. Next slide. This slide shows the permitting and regulation program. It's funded by both general fund and levy, as well as program revenue, so permitting, regulatory fees. Most of this comes from development activity, but some also is generated from tree removal and replanting application fees. You may recall that in previous meetings when we've talked about the different fees that are associated with our regulatory roles in urban forestry, we try to keep those in non-development low to reduce the burden and barrier for requiring folks to do things like get permits to maintain the street trees. That is the city's policy. Development is more full cost recovery. About $175,000 in revenue comes from the tree inspectors working on capital improvement projects. Capital improvement projects are basically development projects that occur on city properties. So DES doing a project involving wastewater management, they of course are subject to regulations of the city as we all are, and urban forestry has a role in that. That's an example of a capital improvement project. Next slide, please. The Science Outreach and Planting group in urban forestry has one of the most diverse funding situations. In addition to the general fund and levy, which are in the center here, the Urban Forestry Trust funds support programming in science outreach and planting, as well as PSEF funds. The Urban Forestry Fund allocation noted here is supporting the street tree inventory project, which you will be hearing more about shortly. And the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund is the primary funding source for current tree planting. So most of the 3,500 trees I mentioned before, that is largely paid for out of the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund each year. PSEF will be supporting a significant expansion of that tree planting work. The funds coming to urban forestry to support and administer PSEF equitable tree canopy are the staff that are developing and running those programs with communities. Next slide. The Tree Planting and Preservation Fund is the primary funding source for Parks Urban Forestry's yard tree giveaway, the free street tree program, and the Learning Landscapes program. Those comprise the bulk of our voluntary tree planting programs. The revenue is largely provided from unmet tree preservation requirements in private property development as per Title 11, the tree code. Last year, revenue and expenses were equal as we've expanded the tree planting program. Last year, the fund supported planting 2,000 yard trees and 1,500 street trees. One of the primary expense drivers is the cost of establishing previously planted trees, what we call establishment care. We've known these costs would increase significantly as our program has progressed, which is one of the reasons we've been cautious in how we manage the fund, even as it accrued in balance since being created in 2015. Essentially, we need a healthy balance in order to sustain higher planting and tree establishment levels, and we are at that point now. Revenue increases the last few years are largely due to the delayed projects during COVID, which shifted the timing of those payments. We're expecting lower revenue due to declines in development activity, which we are seeing right now in Portland, and are projected to last at least for the next 18 months, if not longer. So we are seeing declines into the tree planting and preservation fund. At current pace, the tree planting and preservation fund can likely sustain this level of planting for the next 8 to 10 years. Beyond that, either programmatic changes or new funding will need to be identified. I want to note that changes to policy such as the large tree amendment, which is due to expire at the end of next calendar year, or longer than expected declines in development activity will impact revenue to the tree planting and preservation fund. And the impact will be negative. It'll reduce those. I want to emphasize that this is a mitigation fund. That means money into this fund means trees were lost. Our goal is always, first and foremost, to preserve trees and care for them or encourage others to care for them, particularly as Portland pursues increased development to meet housing needs. We need the trees and the housing. Long-term, it's necessary to diversify the funding sources for tree planting away from just the tree planting and preservation fund. Almost done. Last slide. For the next fiscal year, which will start July 1st, as Bob said, what we're working on now, we're submitting 2 budget packages for consideration. These have been approved by the Bureau Director. Both of these you've heard about before. The first is funding to continue the Arborist Trainee Program. That program is a new program. It's taken a few years to build with the Human Resources Department in the city. But the idea is that these will be folks who are entering arboriculture and urban forestry as a profession. The second of the 2 budget packages that we'll be submitting for consideration is to continue to develop and implement the Equitable Tree Canopy Program. That program is, of course, entirely funded by PSEF, and it's understood that'll proceed. However, we have to go through these budget steps to get the funding where it needs to be to expend it. I also want to highlight 2 significant impacts we expect to the permitting and regulation program. And you heard a little bit about this earlier from Todd Lofgren. Some of these. Portland is seeing a marked decline in development activity, and that is leading to a reduction in permitting needs for private property development. And that in turn means we have reduced permit fee revenue. So at present, we are holding off on filling several vacant positions in order to reduce our expenses in response. And we are preparing a request for Director Long for the Bureau to continue to fund at least some of those positions, which we still need to do work. The point right now is our own revenue can't cover those costs because the permit revenue is down. That situation is further complicated by the single permitting authority project. This is what Deputy Director Lofgren mentioned before. That project will consolidate all development permitting into a single bureau. And it is a very fast-tracked project. It's supposed to be in place under a new single permitting authority in July. The specifics are unclear and being worked on, such as the number of positions, the associated funding, the paths for authority, the City Foresters Authority, the City Sewer Engineers Authority, the City Traffic Engineers Authority. All of these things are part of that project and still being determined. And then also the specifics of what future alignments will be around delivery of tree and natural area services will look like. A really significant next step is the budget process that's going on now at council about where funding is put to provide services. So this is a mention of what we just talked about with Director Lofgren. We had another request within the Bureau for a position called a tree education specialist, which was not funded at this time. Thus far, I shouldn't say funded. This is the beginning of a process, as Bob said, so there are many steps to come. Right now, we're working within the Bureau area, which is why this is coming to you now, because it's early days and early stages and an appropriate time for you to ask questions and advise. And that concludes my presentation. Maybe before we go to questions, Bob, again, I'm sorry to have asked you for something kind of on the fly. Did you find anything to share? Or is it something we should send later?
No, I can definitely share that. So there's I pulled up two percentages. The first less useful because it involves all of our balances and everything. And that's 4.6% of the total. Again, not really particularly useful. What I think is more useful is looking within the general fund, and this is the split of both Parks Levy and general fund resources. And of that, urban forestry's 10.6% of the adopted budget. The largest is recreation 31, land stewardship 27, operations and strategies, which includes people like me and the deputy director. That's 19%, and assets and development is 12%.
Thank you, Bob. Assets and development might not be as clear to y'all as the other things. So assets and development is a few different services led by Lauren McGuire. Planning and development of new parks, property acquisition for new park purposes, and also what we call professional repair and maintenance services. So that's the park systems, electricians, plumbers, and carpenters that work to maintain the built infrastructure, which Bob Salinger referred to with the backlog earlier today. Thanks, Bob. I think we're ready for questions and discussion. Bob, can you stick around for questions? Thank you.
Questions, comments, commissioners? I had actually a couple. So the interagency agreements, and it's kind of getting back to the public comments earlier and the complex web of federal requirements and so forth. Are we now involved in helping to meet federal requirements through urban forestry, through interagency agreement?
It is not something like expressly written into interagency agreements, but all the tree activities that the city does, regardless of where those are housed, are in fulfillment of various requirements and goals.
Right.
So I would say yes, they are part of that, potentially in some way. It's not specified that way.
Right.
So where funding or services are housed isn't directly relevant to meeting requirements.
Right.
The requirements need to be met, no
Right.
matter who's doing them and what part of the org chart they're in.
Yeah. So currently, like BES though, is using their own people to meet a lot of those requirements, or just kind of thinking sort of ahead as this maybe potentially changes. What do you foresee as the role of urban forestry?
And I saw Todd come back on, so I don't know
Okay.
if you wanted to
Oh,
jump in on that.
thank you, Todd. Good timing.
So the city of Portland, right, is the legal entity here. We have different restrictions around different funding accounts, but when you start talking about like state and federal requirements, whether those are environmental or ADA or others, the city of Portland's accountable. So I think, it's more about, I don't want to characterize let Bob's comments stand on their own. We're all on the hook for federal and state requirements, regardless of which bureau manages a piece of property.
Yeah, actually, I had another quick question, which was the PSEP funds. So could they pay for some of the educational, it seems like that's part and parcel to some of the goals of equitable tree canopy. So just wondering about that.
Education and outreach are definitely parts of the PSEP program.
Okay.
What we were looking into was Separate from that, an existing need for some time has just been general communication with the public about trees are good. Here's what tree care should entail. You
Right.
need a permit. Here's how to get a permit.
Mhm.
That's a weakness that we have found that
Mhm.
regardless of PSEF, and
Mhm.
it is some of the same messaging, but PSEF is a little bit different since it's focused on increasing canopy and tree stewardship in priority areas of the city. So there's some overlap, but they're a little bit different.
Right, got it.
Yeah.
And I'll just add on that, that there's, through the work we did with the community stakeholders advisory committee, there's a real outreach education component of the PSEP work. There's also real interest in that being done through a lot of the community partners and community organizations. So yeah, a really big part of it, but it's mostly gonna be done through the community organizations that we'll be partnering with on that. So yeah, the position's a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I should say this as well, Commissioner Feldstein, that recognition of the need for more communication around that was in part from this commission, has often been discussed about we need more education, we need more engagement, understanding from the public. And also canopy is declining, so we've been sitting there trying to, in spite of everything we're doing, thinking about how we might help change that, because that's part of our role, and we think that is part.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jortner.
Yeah, thank you. So I noticed that, there was no new budget package listed for the additional responsibilities associated with natural area and or tree program that has been sort of assigned to the align with Parks and Rec. And so, I'm wondering, you say when the natural resources and tree piece, you had that below, and you said the budget process is going to work that through, but it seems like what's going to be the process to prepare a budget analysis for the needs and, presumably additional resources that will be needed to provide those services that have been assigned. And also, what's your perspective? Because, if it's coming from environmental services, it's likely that at least part or maybe most of those services were being provided through rates, not the general fund, although I think that it is some blend. I'm not sure exactly what their allocations are now, but Parks doesn't charge water rates or sewer rates. And so what's kind of the game plan for accommodating those additional service requirements and potentially looking to additional funding sources or like during the public comment period, ensuring that those resources are not reduced to provide those services.
Deputy Commissioner.
You want me to jump in on that one?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Sure. So I think we're in this transition period. So we're thinking of like how we used to do our work around bureau authorities and how we will be city government on January 1st, 2025, but actually starting the org chart with this budget July 2024. And so as we go forward, I think it's important to recognize like we've got about 140 interagency agreements between those 5 bureaus, Bureau of Planning, Sustainability, Water, Environmental Services, Transportation, and Parks today. That's how the bureaucracy did the work around to have a one city approach to services, right? 140 different touch points between those bureaus to try to figure out how we're going to manage services. Pretty crazy, right? So we can do better. So part of this operational management unit around trees and natural areas, and I think it's confusing but important that we limit it to natural areas. And there's something separate conversation going on around natural resource policy and decision making that is a separate conversation. But just for the operational unit of the day-to-day, month-to-month tree and natural area management, that the expectation from council in the resolution is that bureaus that currently fund those services today, either through their staff or through contracts and funding sources, will continue, and that this effort is to functionally align those investments and not defund any current investments from current bureaus. We do have legal responsibilities around how funds are used, just like PSEP or ratepayer dollars. And what we're saying is there's a functional alignment, both for accountability reasons, so we can be clear to the public of what services are being provided. And then also maybe some efficiencies and common standards between the bureaus. So we can address, you know, a common standard of how we do, how do we manage natural areas in the city of Portland? What is our expectation around trees in the city of Portland within our different bureaus, so we can have more common standards? So that's really what we're after. And there'll be kind of work through the budget process. So we'll be working collaboratively with those bureaus during this budget process. Our goal is hopefully to have some initial proposals in the requested budget by the end of January so the public can see those. And then work will continue, I'm sure, through the adopted budget, which happens in early June.
Are you saying that those programs are not moving from BES to parks? I mean, the term align keeps being used, but now I'm confused.
They're going to move, but the expectation in the amendments from the council approved is that both people and dollars should be moving to this new operational unit. That the expectation to council was that the current bureaus that are funding those services don't defund those activities. So the dollars that are paying for the full-time employees that might be associated with this functional alignment should be coming with dollars and people.
Okay, just one more quick follow-up.
Sure,
When I hear that the BES natural areas are moving into Parks and Rec, my assumption kind of is that it would be naturally integrated with the existing natural area program, you know, land stewardship or what the parks land stewardship. You know, it didn't seem like a separate unit. It seemed like the point was to integrate it into
right,
you know, programs, not have them be sort of something that's just moved over.
We manage about 8,000 acres of natural areas at Parks and Recreation. The Bureau of Environmental Services manages about 800 acres today. And what we're talking about is the operational day-to-day, month-to-month management of those properties. So it's not everything, right? It's not all responsibilities. There might be other things that BES is doing around stormwater and other things that may not move in this first action. And so it's really about the day-to-day, month-to-month management of those natural areas. That's what the resolution and I'm happy to put it in to the chat to make sure. No, I think it's important though, just everyone, because there's a lot of non-intentional, I don't think, but misinformation about like this idea of even this Bureau of Natural Resources. That was never even an amendment that council considered. The MAPS amendment did not create a bureau, would not create a Bureau of Natural Resources. All it was doing was putting the words natural resources in the Public Works Service Area organizational chart and asking the bureaus to work together to come back with a plan by September 2024. Mike Jordan's actual resolution that he proposed that council adopted actually had much of that language in it already without the timeline and without actually putting the words natural resources, presupposing that it would be in Public Works. That was all that was at play between MAPS Amendment 1 and what was proposed by Mike Jordan. But there was a lot of public testimony about this will create a Bureau of Natural Resources. That was never represented by any council member on the dais, including MAPS, nor was the language in the amendment. And so I think there's also some misinformation, not intentional, but just confusion because there's a lot of conversation about this topic.
Thank you. We have one more minute for this agenda item. We have two more commissioners. So just quickly, first Megan and then Commissioner Vandermark, then Commissioner Klatt.
Yeah, quick comment. I'm wondering, due to Todd, what you were just sharing, what Roberta shared earlier, if maybe we could have a presentation about this in the future, because I think there's a lot of context and it's easy to get confused. So I'll say that. But my question was kind of about where sustainable futures is within this because of street tree maintenance. And this is not a new thing, but one thing I have to look at this is from a public perception. We have literally doubled the size of urban forestry staff, or that's the plan in like 5 years. And that's dollars, obviously, and I understand what the levy can and cannot fund, so I'm not trying to get into that. But I am trying to say from a public perception, we're growing, but we're still not maintaining our street trees. And so like, I know the goal of Sustainable Futures is to do that or identify the funding source. So kind of where is that in the driver of this massively increasing budget and staff, but we still aren't maintaining our street trees? So I'm just
Thank
trying to-
you for that question, Commissioner Vandermark. I'm gonna respond and then I'm gonna guess Deputy Director Lofgren will too. The entire urban forestry budget, as you heard today, at its best, now with all of these new exciting capacities, is $19 million. The work that we did with a consultant showed that street tree maintenance for 1 year will be around $20 or more million a year. And of course, we want street tree maintenance to be an additional service that we're providing, not giving up any of the other things that are so important to forest management. So I'll start there, just saying it's a great observation that we've expanded and grown a lot financially and our services are more robust. It's still not enough to pull that off. Deputy Director Lofgren?
Yeah, and just real big pictures, the Sustainable Future program is to align, define our service levels and then align appropriate funding services or funding to go along with those service level expectations. And so I know there's an urban forest management plan that's coming up. So that's like a great opportunity to make sure that the community and the city align on where does street tree maintenance fit in that. So we can define the service level. And then we've done some work on the costing and then identified different options about how that could be funded. And we're doing more research, as you heard about, on the capital side too, and the county side. So these are all things that we continue to bring back to council, we can bring to you, but ultimately it'll be the council and the community that decides who, what service levels we have and what funding sources, right? And oftentimes those are a combination of, as you've heard today, general fund, existing sources like PSEF, partnering with other bureaus, and then, as you know, ballot measures, bonds, and levies historically have been what parts is used.
Thank you. Commissioner Clapp.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the presentation, everybody. I want to note that if there is a lot of confusion, that I think it would behoove the leaders in this room, Todd, the directors, as well as city council, so if you guys could take this to them, to be a little bit more clear and maybe a little bit more specific about what we're talking about. So what does it mean, like what Commissioner Jordan brought up with alignment of natural resources? Like that's such a broad spectrum. I think if there is a lot of miscommunication, if there's a lot of misinformation and confusion, it would help if everybody was a little bit more specific of what is being covered under different things. That's just the note I wanted to add just from what I'm hearing. The other thing that I think is interesting that Commissioner Vandermark brought up is that we've nearly doubled the budget of urban forestry, yet we have still lost canopy. And we've not met the needs of education through our education and outreach program. So I guess I want to know if the budget that you just presented, Jen, your city forester, Cairo, excuse me. Is that a status quo of what we've been doing? Or I know there's two main things that you've changed that are being added on. One is is Rick Faber's department, making sure that we are in compliance. The other is a significant increase in terms of the botanic specialists on the education outreach section. We've added significantly more according to the sheet that you showed in terms of who's doing what with a lot of street tree planting or new planting, PSEF management, that kind of thing. So I guess what I want to know is, has all of this new budget, a doubling of our budget, has that actually gone and significantly got us moved forward towards the goals in our management plan? And if so, how? And if not, what are we gonna do to make that happen, and how can we use our budget to actually review what's been done and make changes?
I have a suggestion. It's a fabulous question. We're gonna be talking about canopy because we're out of time for this budget item. So I'm wondering if we could start to have that conversation in the in sort of the canopy tree inventory update part of it. And also, it sounds like such an important big topic that maybe also have it as a specific agenda item. Does it?
I suppose, I mean, if we're out of time, then that's fine, that's the way it goes. I don't think it's certainly not germane to what
Okay.
Nick's gonna bring up, because that's talking about the street tree inventory
Yeah,
in a specific sense, not the budget.
Sure.
The
How would
question
you like to handle this?
Thank you. I really appreciate you trying to keep the agenda.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I will respond to that, and I just conferred with Nick and Biz, and they can shorten their
Okay, good.
inventory report a little bit accordingly.
Thank you.
The answer is yes. And it's actually not the things you mentioned. One of them it is code compliance. We, as you may recall from the old days, we have never been staffed to do that work. So following up on it's not really us being compliant, that's not it. It's about permittees being compliant. Tree is removed, tree planting is required. It has to be of a certain stock size. It has to be a certain species. This group, for the first time, will be following up on those. We found from our own studies, 4 or 5 years ago now, that approximately 2,000 required trees each year were not getting planted because we were not able to follow up on permits. And we use that information to advocate to get the code compliance team. And again, other regulatory functions in the city have code compliance as well. So that's one. Park tree maintenance is huge. We have never before, the levy, been able to maintain and care for our park trees on a routine systematic way. It's always just been reacting to concerns that were called into us. So we are finally able to care for 1.2 million park trees the way they should be. So they'll have longer lives, be safer, fewer public safety hazards. Other areas, tree planting has expanded. Most of that is indeed funded by the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund because we have very carefully managed that ongoing funding to make sure we could maximize it. Some of it also is from the Parks Levy to plant trees in parks. Other areas where we've expanded, thanks to the levy, is we have been able to increase the single point of contact for trees, our tree tech team, which were always kind of under duress and understaffed. So we have better customer service in that area. Brian, am I forgetting any? I feel like there's so many. Oh, wait, Belinda's sitting here. So we have not had funding for 20+ years, predating all of us, I think here, maybe not all of us, definitely me, to update the forest management plan, which is horribly outdated. Belinda's here and leading that effort. Her position is funded by the levy. After that, she'll be working on, and here comes the canopy decline question, code amendment updates. We are trying to identify what the cause of canopy decline is right now. We do not know the answer to that. But our initial work on that, which is GIS analysis by CJ Kunowski, who is also a levy-funded position, so we have our own GIS capacity for the first time ever, is that it may be from property development. Where we're seeing the greatest canopy loss is in southwest of Portland, and it's case by case associated with significant property development. So we don't know that that is the correlation, but we are starting to see that. What does that mean? That means code amendments. And in the meantime, as I mentioned before, what we internally have been noodling on and feel is a really important effort is to increase the level of education to the public around the importance of trees, how to care for trees, how we can help care for trees, and also that you need a permit to do a lot of things. We know a lot of folks just don't know that, and we want to avoid them having compliance issues. Does that help?
It does.
Great.
I think so.
Sorry, Nick and Biz, you'll have to take a little more time. Presentation, that was longer than I thought.
Thanks. So we do have one important follow-up discussion, and that is, you've heard how important that the Portland Parks and Rec budget is gonna be, over the next few cycles, given all the changes, all the political changes, and we need a liaison to the Portland Parks and Rec Budget Advisory Committee from the group. And wondering if we've got any volunteers, any folks interested. in that who are currently here. I know we're missing a few people as well. Commissioner Jordan?
Yeah, thanks. I'm afraid you might kill me, but I actually I would like to nominate, unless I don't know if anyone else has expressed interest, but I will say that Megan Vandemark served, I believe, in the last Budget Advisory Committee, and she brings a broad understanding of the programmatic issues from not only this bureau, but other bureaus. And at this particular time, with all this change, if Megan would be willing, I think the continuity actually would be super helpful. That would be a great option if she's willing and others are open to that.
And it's only several meetings, is that right? Am I
3 meetings over the next
meetings.
month and a half, 2 months.
They're in
I
the
don't know, Megan,
evening.
maybe you could talk a little, just really briefly explain what that role was like for you, and that might help other people decide if they're interested too, but yeah.
Yeah, and what I would always say, I'm always happy to do that, but if someone else wants, I don't wanna bogart the BAC, y'all, on behalf of this. Yeah, I mean, it's a deep dive into parks budgeting, and it's a lot of time with Todd, which is obviously a great way to spend your time. But you know, I mean, it is a deeper understanding of both urban forestry, but also, you know, all of the aspects and departments within parks. So you're gonna get kind of the slides we saw today, you're gonna get a deeper in-depth version of that understanding. You work with representatives from the Parks Board, as well as other community representatives. You have a lot of discussions, and then we kind of, you know, make recommendations, so to speak, that get included as part of the package that goes to council.
And the first meeting is quickly, right? It's coming right up.
Yeah, at the end of November.
So that's another sort of constraint, is we need to move on this. Any other interested parties? Or can we twist Megan's arm?
I felt like I'm not serving on one of these committees, and maybe it's time for me to step up, but my concern was I don't know that I have all of the background knowledge that Megan has. And so if she's willing, I definitely would support that, because I think when it comes to budgeting, that's like, I want to make sure we're well represented with everything to be able to advocate where needed. So.
Deputy Director, did you have a comment on this?
Just that the current dates that we have held are November 29th, which is the first meeting from 5 to 7, and then December 20th, also 5 to 7, and we're offering a virtual option. So we will have in-person and virtual options to support. And then there'll be one more in January, TBD.
Thoughts?
It's December 19th, just to check.
Yeah, could I almost even recommend, if it's okay, that Leah, would you want to just have a quick chat, and then we could circle back by the end of the week?
Perfect.
And if someone else isn't, then if Leah's really interested, I think the goal of the way parks present it is also that you can come in and it is a comprehensive experience. I don't think it's like, you know, come in and have to know all the budget. So maybe Leah and I could check in and then circle back with this group, unless there's someone else with that burning interest beyond either of our willingness.
Okay, so is the group, oh, good.
I would move that UFC approve Megan and Leah to participate as they are able in these parks budget meetings that are coming up in the next 2 months, I guess.
To collaborate on the best kind of representation between the two of you. Does that seem fair? Okay, second? I second. All approved, all in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we have our representatives. Thank you.
You.
Right, next item, the tree inventory update.
Right. We'll do a quick introduction to hand it off. I appreciate Nick Desai and Biz Miller's time today. Nick is the de facto project manager for the street tree inventory update. And Biz Miller is key staff. They work with many seasonal staff, and part of Biz and Nick's role is working with them. So thank you both for being here and giving us an update on the street tree inventory thus far. Please proceed.
Thanks for the introduction. City Forester Cairo.
Or should I call you botanic specialist Desai? Botanic specialist Miller.
I'm gonna share my screen now. So this takes a minute. Okay. Let's see, is that working? Okay, here we go. Sorry, folks. Screen sharing has failed to start. No.
Nick, do you want me to share mine? I have your PDF pulled up.
Sure.
Work.
Yeah, that'd be
Okay.
great. Thanks.
I'll do that instead.
Nice backup plan.
All right, thanks, Brian.
Thank you, analyst Lando.
So Biz and I today are going to share a brief overview of the inventory project, the street tree inventory project. And in our presentation today, we're going to share an overview of why inventories are important, how we use this data, how we conduct data collection, and reveal some early stats and change analysis since our first inventory. To begin with, what is a tree inventory and why? Simply put, you need to understand what your assets are in order to manage them. And since 2010, Portland has conducted comprehensive inventories of trees planted in parks and in the public right-of-way. This data complements other canopy data that we have, such as LiDAR canopy maps and other formal inventories, such as the UFIA, which is the Urban Forest Inventory Analysis. And that canopy study provided sample-based estimates of canopy cover across all property types. Our park and street tree inventories look at each individual tree and collect much more refined data and provide a data set that populates a GIS database with tree and site-specific data, allowing us to understand canopy composition and distribution, among other factors. Next slide, please. How we use this info. So as you can imagine, a complete inventory provides a lot of useful data. This information has been instrumental in determining how we allocate resources. For instance, understanding neighborhood level canopy distribution and availability of planting spaces informs our planting priority index. Canopy composition and condition data inform our approved street tree planting lists. Likewise, species representation and distribution have been vital for pest and pathogen planning. A great recent example is how we were able to publish a map of Fraxinus species planted in parks and in the right-of-way. And the map on the right shows a screenshot of that, which is publicly available on our EAB website. Understanding where our ash trees are located and their size and condition has helped for monitoring efforts and to effectively manage impact from this charismatic, voracious insect. Other examples, the park tree inventory data has facilitated our new proactive park tree maintenance program funded by the levy, and likewise soon to be updates to the urban forest plan. Now a little history on our inventories. Yes, throughout the history of Portland, there have been partial inventories of canopy. However, Portland's first comprehensive street tree inventory was conducted between 2010 and 2016. Myself and Commissioner Vandermark were part of that effort. For this endeavor, we partnered with neighborhood groups and trained volunteers to assist with a good portion of the data collection. Collection primarily occurred on paper, and there's an example of one of the paper section maps that we used back in that day. And then data was transferred manually, uploaded to a GIS database. Extensively involving community members at this time allowed us to increase education and awareness around the importance of urban canopy while collecting data. And this was good timing, as over this span, Title 11 came into existence. Last year, we began an update to baseline data, and we dubbed this Street Tree Inventory 2.0. And this time around, we have more resources, allowing primary data collection to occur by staff with assistance from volunteers on community field days. Data is collected directly into a mobile GIS app called Field Maps, and there's a screenshot of that, of what we would see on our phones when we're collecting data in the lower right corner. And a key difference from using paper maps is that property lines and right-of-way boundaries are easier to discern as we're inputting the data. And on the topic of inputting data, Biz is now going to share a bit about our data collection plan.
So for every tree that's planted in the right of way across the city, not only do we collect location information on the map that Nick just showed, we also identify every tree, at least to genus, and many we identify species. We collect information on the diameter at standard height, which is 4.5 feet above the ground. This picture looks like it's not being measured at standard height, but the tree actually has a fork, so it's an illusion. We collect data on the condition of the tree. They're rated either excellent, good, fair, or dead. We measure the site where the tree is planted, and we gather data about the site type where the tree is planted, including if it is improved or unimproved, if it is improved with the sidewalk, and if there are overhead wires or high voltage wires. And as mentioned previously, this street tree inventory 2.0 is a 3-year plan. We used a few criteria to decide which order the neighborhoods would be inventoried. First, we wanted to re-inventory neighborhoods that hadn't been inventoried since the beginning of the initial 1.0 inventory. So we started with many of those neighborhoods last year. Secondly, we wanted to follow the 3-year rotation cycle of our priority planting neighborhoods. So we're inventorying in neighborhoods following the free street tree planting program, so we can capture data about those planting efforts and get those new trees on our maps. And in 2022, we had a crew of 6 community service aides, seasonals, who inventoried 14 neighborhoods and collected 64,000 trees. This past year, we had a crew of 10 seasonals and collected 87,186 trees in 29 neighborhoods. And you can see those neighborhoods that we collected this year in yellow. And next year, so Nick will touch on this a little bit more, but so far we've been collecting more trees in most neighborhoods than were found in the first inventory. So we're estimating that next year we'll, in order to complete the project and re-inventory all the areas that had initially been inventoried, we will need to collect 117,000 trees in 52 neighborhoods. And who's doing all this collection? The project team consists of 10 data collectors who work on the project from May to October. 1 project lead, who is myself, 1 project manager, who is Nick, a GIS technician, CJ Krunowski, who creates our maps and manages our database, and the science and policy coordinator, Jeff Ramsey, who supervises our work group. We also had community collection days with groups from urban forestry, who are pictured here, Parks and Recreation, and neighborhood tree stewards who came out on days to help us collect data.
Thanks, Biz. So what have we learned so far? As data collection has just ended, we're currently running analyses on data to date, but we're happy to share some preliminary findings. Of great interest since the first inventory, we've noted an average 23% increase in street trees across neighborhoods. Some neighborhoods have fewer, like Argay dipped, and others like Cully have increased significantly, 52% more street trees captured in Cully. While we haven't looked more closely at this data, it's good to remember that in the years between the inventories, Title 11 went into effect. It was implemented in 2015. It's possible that in addition to more focused right-of-way plantings, some of these numbers may be attributed to better regulation of street trees and required plantings in development situations enforced by our tree inspectors. Other stats to note, maples. In the first inventory, we found overrepresentation of maples. More than 1 in 4 trees on the street was a maple. Overrepresentation puts our canopy at risk of certain, in this case, maple pest or diseases that might arise. In response to this finding, we immediately removed maples from our approved street tree planting lists. And it looks like that effort has been effective, for maples are now down by a couple percentage points. Meanwhile, we're noticing a slight increase in dogwoods, slight here. And of course, we're just partway through our collection cycle. Now, inventory data informs some changes to the trees approved for smaller planting lists, and many underperforming or drought-sensitive trees were removed. So it's possible with fewer options, we're seeing cornus species rise, or maybe they're being selected more because people still really love their dogwoods, or maybe they're more available at nurseries than other small form trees on our list. The last number to highlight are situations where we have underplanted a large site. And this means that either a small or a medium form tree was planted in a site that could support a larger tree. It's good to see that right tree, right place is occurring more often now. So that's a peek behind the curtain of the street tree inventory project so far. We do have a publicly accessible project page at this URL, or you can direct your phones to the QR code and it'll take you right there. On this project page, there's a web map. This is a screenshot from the web map, but you can explore trees in your neighborhood or any trees in the city. Park trees and right-of-ways are captured, and you find all the data that we collect on those trees in this map. This map will be updated. It has last year's re-inventory, the first year of re-inventory data into it already, and it will be updated with data collected from this year as well. And that update should be in effect by January of 24. So what's next? Well, as I mentioned, we will have an updated project and web map by the new year. We're planning a tree summit, a community event for sharing inventory and canopy data. This is slated for later in February. And we are going to begin our hiring cycle again. We're going to be collecting data in 2024 between May and October. The hiring process usually begins around February or so. So if you know of anyone who would be a great data collector, knows their trees or can learn them, and collects a high volume of trees in a day, or it can work really fast, let us know. And so with the remaining time, we can take any questions. Thanks for projecting, Brian.
Questions, comments?
The only comment I have is that I appreciate that you have more funds available, and so you're paying staff to do the inventory. I think there's a strong possibility that the involvement in terms of volunteers and the great reduction in the amount of volunteer opportunities at Friends of Trees because of policy changes, there is not going to be as big a core base to support when you go out for a levy and you ask the tree community to come support you. They might, but it's going to be easier to get a hold of them because you haven't engaged them in activities both at Friends of Trees and at Urban Forestry. Just an opinion.
Yes, Commissioner Nelson, thank you. That's a good point. Appreciate that. And we will try to incorporate more community field days next year. We do know this was a very popular project with community members, and it's a great way to increase support for the urban forest. At the same time, we also have a more robust education outreach community stewardship group now, so we can have simultaneous events going forward. But your point is well taken. We'll try to incorporate more community days into it.
Thank you.
I can add something too, because what Mechanic Specialist Desai just shared might seem to contradict what I was saying earlier about urban forestry pursuing a tree education position. We do have more education and outreach staffing, which is one more position. Those folks are focused largely on canopy preservation and expansion in the low canopy, low income parts of town, and supporting our voluntary tree planting programs that are all focused in those areas. So they're doing a lot of work with community groups and community members in those areas. And there's more than enough tree education work to go around. I wanted to ask too, could you speak a little bit to the role of YCC? I saw them on an earlier slide.
Oh yeah, thanks for asking. So YCC, the Youth Conservation Crew, they assisted us with the inventory collection last year and this year as well. It served as a real great opportunity to show the youth in these programs how we collect another side of urban forestry and to be involved with the scientific process. We did have mentoring days with them and worked with them, and then they also collected on their own. So that was a successful piece of this project, and we're going to continue it next year.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, we're just about out of, oh, is there?
Leah's got her hand up, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Commissioner Fleck, yeah.
Just a quick question, because I remember when one of the things that stuck with me from when Vivek Shandis shared his research around tree canopy was how important we all know preserving old trees because of the canopy, how large they are and how much they grow compared to a new planting. And I just thought it's interesting to clarify when you said that increase, it was the number of trees, correct? Not necessarily the actual canopy, because we know the canopy's gone down.
Right, it was the number of street trees. And remember, so in the first inventory cycle, we found nearly 220,000 street trees. So it's a small portion of our urban forest overall, and it's yet to be seen how that factors into the larger canopy analyses.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting data point to highlight, and just to help when it comes to that education piece too, however this gets shared more broadly, just to help people understand. Because I think it's easy to conflate the two, like the number of trees and the canopy that we have, but to understand they're actually two different things. And that's why maintaining the trees that we already have is so critical. So anyway, that was just something that jumped out at me that I thought was interesting.
Thanks.
There's also a question in the chat.
Okay.
Nick, will those community days have a comprehensive tree ID aspect to them? I know that was a really valuable aspect of the 1.0 approach, or will the education programming referenced? I can speak to the second if you speak to the
Okay, sure. I think the tree ID aspect, yeah, it was really important for the first, for 1.0. We trained people to be volunteers, to be team leaders, to lead in the collection, and they had to really know their trees very well. We're balancing the time that we have collecting data, high volume of data, with incorporating volunteers into the process. And we're gonna try to keep the tree ID piece of it, but it's hard to dedicate. It required a lot of time training team leaders, so we'll see how we can balance that next year. We're trying to work that out.
And the education programming, we continue now to have tree education programs that focus on identification. You may have noticed there are fewer of them of late than there have been because we have a vacancy. We had a staff change that we are hiring for now. So those will continue.
And I'll just add that with more staff collecting primarily, we have an opportunity for staff to be the leaders and volunteers to assist us in data collection.
So we are out of time. I'll give you, Roberta, maybe 1 minute or so, but I just want to make a quick comment that I would love to hear maybe as an agenda item in the future, what we could do about that mismatch of the size of the tree, you know, not being optimal or as big as it could be for the site. You know, what is the plan for that? I mean, I think there's a lot of people in the group that might be interested in that. Commissioner Jordan.
Yeah, in follow-up to what Commissioner Plack said, and you too, Adrian, the data collection piece is really important and interesting, but there's these strategic questions and policy questions that this inventory can inform that also could inform the urban forest plan. And it seems like it would be, I mean, this, you know, small form tree to large form tree ratio, underplanting, tree condition and climate resilience. You know, what do we want to learn from this? You know, this amazing data that y'all are collecting that can inform our policy decisions, and understanding what those questions are sooner rather than later seems important. And that's what I'm kind of yearning for, is like, what do we need to know from this that'll help us make those decisions? And you know, maybe that's a discussion for later, but I'm interested if you and Belinda are talking about how this work can, you know, inform the urban forest plan and what kind of questions we need to answer for that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Luckily, Belinda and I work just a few feet away from each other, so we're in good communication about this. And I'll just say, stay tuned for the tree summit later next year. We're going to be addressing some of those questions and talking about some of those topics too.
Awesome,
Great.
thanks.
Thanks, everybody. We're out of time, and but just want to say, any ideas for agenda items, you know, send it to us. We'd love to know what's on your minds.
Could I just make one quick comment on that?
Yeah.
As an agenda item, I want to just say, so everyone's here, can we extend the period of our meeting? Because so far, I know I'm new. Every single meeting except one, we've either pushed all of our agenda items late and we've had to cut things off very quickly. And I recall years ago, this used to be a 4-hour meeting. And I don't know why it's been switched down to 2, but I just want to put that on everyone's mind here, so that we can have actual discussions instead of just everyone saying what they want and then we move on after that.
Yeah, good point, Casey. All right, we'll bring it up at our meeting, you know, planning meeting. All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you
Have
all.
a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Biz.